Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, which means we are LinkedIn Live for all of you. And I am thrilled to have my special guest today, Amy Gardner from Epichromatic. Did I say it right? I think I did.
Epichromatic. You're close. You're close. Epichromatic.
Yeah, which is a fantastic name. And I tell you, I had to look it up what it meant because I wanted to know. I thought surely this has something, has a good meaning behind it. And for all of you that don't know, it's a type of camera lens, right? That like
Telescope camera
removes
lens. Yep.
distortions and things. And I was like, oh, what a great name for a consulting firm that is bringing you clarity in your business. So I thought that was um, super fun. Is there a story how you found it, the name, or how you knew
Oh,
about it?
there is. There is. So I'm a former IP litigator. I practiced litigation and IP litigation at a big law firm for a long time at Gardner in Chicago. And then I was at a mid-sized firm where I practiced IP litigation. And so because of that experience, I knew the importance of us getting a trademark for our name when I left. I was a dean of students at the University of Chicago, left that job so that we could found Epichromatic and get my coaching certification, all that good stuff. So there was a particular name that I wanted, and initial searches looked like the trademark would be fine. And then once we hired a trademark lawyer, because even as an IP litigator, I hired a trademark lawyer to get the trademark. He came back and said, actually, the secondary search, I think there's some problems here. And I was so wedded to that name. There's a good lesson here, right? But then I passed it over to my partner and husband, Keith, and said, all right, I give up. Like, I'm busy bringing in clients, working with clients. I don't have time to figure out a new name. I liked the old one. And so he, as an avid photographer, he came up with Epichromatic. We changed the C at the end to K. So that's why it has the A at the beginning and the K at the end. And that's why it became our name. So it's ironic because at the time, we wanted to help people find clarity about their careers and did not predict we would also be helping people find clarity about their teams. But it ended up being a great name, and he gets all the credit for that.
Ah, this is so fun. So you and I met, I think, was it a women
Yep, Women's
bar
Bar Association of
association?
Illinois.
Yeah. When I was a couple years back, I did because it's like a couple years now. This whole pandemic year is just weird, right in the middle of everything. I was doing some workshops for the Women's Bar Association, and Amy happened to be in the audience, and we connected and had a great conversation. It's been years since we, I think, had that conversation, but found a lot of synergy between um, our feelings about team building and presence and how executives are showing up in the workforce, and of course my work with lawyers at the time, and I still dabble in it whenever I get a chance, and so I thought it would be great to have you with us this morning for that kind of take or a different look from the outside, particularly because to kind of fill out your bio, it's not like you just decided to work with lawyers. You actually were an attorney. You are a member of the of the bar. So you've been in those shoes. Then you also, as you mentioned, as dean of students at the law school, you saw like young lawyers and what they were dealing with, and needing to find work and all of those things, and now putting all of that together to coach attorneys and their firms. And so I thought we would just start with a kind of broad question of what do you see as mistakes that people are making when it comes to their executive presence, because I think everybody has a slightly different take on it, but I do think there are some kind of pervasive things that for some reason are still out there that people are kind of shooting themselves in the foot when it comes to their executive presence. So do you have any thoughts on that? What are you seeing?
Sure. Well, so first of all, I have to correct one thing you said. You totally undersold that workshop. If you haven't seen Allison do a workshop or haven't had Allison do a workshop for your organization, I tend to go to a lot of, or used to go to a lot of workshops, and now I go to a lot of webinars and conferences online. And it's not often that you attend a workshop and think, that presenter is amazing. That was really helpful, and I can apply it right away. And that's something that I always aim for. So I always appreciate it in the things that I attend. And so I reached out to Allison afterwards and said, "Oh my gosh, I want to talk to you." So one of the
Well,
things
thanks.
that I see, of course, one of the things that I see with executive presence is we often don't think about it. And I think that's especially the case right now. And there are lots of good reasons for that. And I do want to stress that I appreciate and understand that this is an incredibly challenging time for a lot of people for a variety of reasons. So if you are trying to get, as one of my clients is trying to get the 5-year-old to sit down and do kindergarten online and be on time for your own meetings, it is understandable why sometimes you may just screech in and turn on the computer, and that is the best you can do that day. But if you do have the capacity to just take a few small steps, you really can improve your executive presence. So I would say that that's the biggest mistake, is just not thinking about it in the flurry of everything else that's going on in the world or in your world. And the thing is that it can really make a difference to just take some few steps and to make it a priority among all the other priorities. And the ironic part is that if you make your executive presence a priority, it can help make many of those other issues easier for you.
Right. There is a little bit of, I think, because I have the title, almost like that with the title comes the presence, and that really isn't necessarily true. That and people, I think, too, when you have that title, of course, their expectation is higher as well. So there's that almost double-edged sword. If you are slamming into the meeting right on time, depending on who's on the meeting with you, the biggest thing that I keep telling people is just communicate more. I think we need to, if that is the situation that you were coming from, then when you turn on the camera, I think it's okay in this day and age to say, wow, glad I made it. The 5-year-old is now working. We'll see how long it lasts, or something. It's okay to put those things in there so that people know, rather than just sort of, I think, pretending that it's not there. Because right at the very beginning, I think we were all doing that, and now we've gotten to the point where it's a year later, and so there's a little bit of guilt, like we should be over that or we should be beyond it, but that's still our reality. Are you finding that the lighting and the setup for virtual is still a challenge, or do you feel like people have sort of finally gotten that message that that they need to work on their background and have good lighting and all of that kind of thing? Or are you still like, like I still have to say this?
It's so funny that you say that, because I do think that last March there was this understanding, ring lights were sold out everywhere and standing desks were not to be found, and many of us were just working at a kitchen table or with a kitchen chair, which is not remotely helpful for your back necessarily. And I think that there was a lot of understanding then. I think that some of us just sort of got comfortable with the way things were. And I think a lot of us assumed, I'm just not going to turn the camera on. I'm just going to put on a fake background, whatever. And the reality is that now, a year later, people do expect that you have your background professional and as best as it can be. And I think that a lot of people understand that. So there might be people watching this thinking, yeah, tell me something I don't know. But we do workshops for law firms and bar associations, in-house counsel teams, and then other employers. And we regularly see, the people who log on, and most of what you see is the ceiling, the people who have the basket of laundry behind them. And I want to stress that we all feel empathy and we all want to marshal that empathy. But the reality is that if you're logging on to pitch a client, or you have to have a tough conversation with your team, they see the things behind you. And it just sends a message, especially now when we don't have 9 hours in the same place where we can ride the elevator together or bump into each other at the coffee pot. What people see is that limited time where it's what you're putting out. And you really do yourself a disservice in terms of how you're being viewed and your executive presence and your leadership if you don't just take a few minutes and try to improve the background.
And before we get off this topic, and one of my pet peeves, and I will just put this out there, if you're going to use a virtual background, then you need to invest the 20 or 30 bucks in a pop-up green screen so that you don't pixelate so much in that screen. Even if your company provided it for you and it is expected that you have the company logo splashed like wallpaper behind you, do yourself a favor and get yourself a green screen, because it's really hard to watch somebody for any length of time when they have this line around their head or their hands are going in and out as they're gesturing, because I'm, of course, a big proponent of go ahead and gesture. Let people see who you are. If you use your hands in real life, use your hands on Zoom. You don't have to sit on them.
There's all this research that shows that people are less likely to trust you if you have a virtual background. So
because they wonder what you're hiding, right? I mean, it's literally, you're like, oh, so, messy background today or whatever. Even just a very simple trifold screen from any of your world market import sort of places that just, you can plop that up behind you and hide whatever it is. Because I understand there's a lot of people that are sharing offices. And so
I have a client who he's been using the baby's room, and he was going for partner over the last year, which he was successful in his quest to make partner. But one of the issues that he was running into was you could see the baby's crib behind him. And so what the very creative solution he and his wife came up with was he started using the standing or the changing table as a standing desk. And then they painted a mural above the crib. So when he's talking to his clients, you see the mural, you don't know that there's a crib below him.
That's great.
That was their creative solution. So I think, again, in the beginning, people really understood. We were all just trying to hold it together with Scotch tape. And now I think people appreciate and notice if you can take a few minutes to, pop a plant behind you. I know that our angle's a little goofy with this program, but I mean, I never had any plants behind me until last March, and I've worked remotely for years. But all of a sudden I realized, oh, wow, that makes it look a little more lively, I guess.
Is there any advice for young folks coming in? Like, how do you get noticed for the right reasons versus perhaps, the wrong, either vocal ones or dress code ones or whatever? I mean, are they doing a good job?
So I think one easy way to distinguish yourself is to focus on improving your executive presence, paying attention to your body language and how you show up. The reality is that if you were hired for the job, they expected you were going to learn. And that goes for any stage of your career, right? They expect that you're going to be learning some things, which means you're going to be making some mistakes. But being able to show up and impress in terms of being client ready and somebody that can be trusted to go to important meetings, or even if it's logging on, or hopefully someday soon going to, heaven forbid, a meeting in person. They want to know that you're able to handle those sorts of situations, because there are probably 1,000 people that they could hire to write that brief, or in the case of lawyers, many more than 1,000 people who could be hired to do exactly the same task. And you have to think about how you can show up and instill confidence and represent the firm or the company or whatever type of employer it is well. And that's a great way to distinguish yourself. Assume that once you have that basic level of able to do the job, then you can really elevate yourself in your standing by working on things like your executive presence, your professionalism, your body language, to really to stand out.
Is there any body language problem that you see with that younger, like a difference generationally? Sometimes I feel like I see stuff and sometimes I feel like I don't. But is there anything that you think, again, kind of sabotages them a little bit or lessens their authority when it comes to their body language?
I think that some of it has to do probably with imposter syndrome, which is something that we talk about a lot, in the sense of being afraid that people are going to figure out you don't belong or you shouldn't be there. And I think that then shows up visibly in body language. I saw something that you did about people who walk into a meeting carrying everything close to them, right? So they have their binder and their laptop and all that. It's almost like a barricade. And that then you see people sit down in a meeting, and there have been studies done about how women take up less space than they need. And in a very real way, physically claiming the space that you need makes such a difference. And certainly we don't see that the same way right now with Zoom, but I do see a lot of people who don't turn their cameras on. And we do a 1-minute video every Tuesday called the Epichromatic on the Epichromatic LinkedIn, or the Epichromatic rather, LinkedIn page. And then I also post it to my LinkedIn page as well. Keith does too. And we had a video over the summer where we show what does it look like, when you have your video off. It looks like you have a bag over your head. And I think that that's something that, a lot of people will just think, not today. And yeah, there's certainly, there may be a day where you're just, the camera's not going to happen that day. But the problem is that then that becomes the default, and you really lose something. I mean, you'd never go to a meeting and hide under the table, right? You wouldn't do it.
You wouldn't, exactly.
So if you wouldn't do that, then do what you can to have that camera on. And, I was in a training about a week ago, a women's networking event, where the speaker talked about how women should, and I quote, always wear makeup on Zoom, and you should always have your hair pulled back on Zoom, and you should always do these things. I mean, just do the best you can, right? Just to show up, be willing to engage, and to think a moment about your executive presence and how you want to show up while you're logging on. Just take a moment. How do I want to show up in this meeting? And then try to manage your executive presence, your body language, so that you can achieve that goal.
Right. The one thing that I think is really sort of funny is as I always give my posture tip, which is just, sit up. Even here, I started to get comfortable, but if you are leading the meeting, right, just that little bit of difference from kind of being just here to being here is big. And even virtually, this comes through. And the difference, as you said, from even difference in age or gender or anything, like that's the one thing that can project confidence. It's the one thing that projects I should be here. I do belong, versus to kind of get over that imposter syndrome. And to your point about the cameras being off, it's funny because I was talking to some younger people that I'm mentoring and things, and I sort of asked them, I said, okay, so tell me, you guys are like 20 something, so, and probably should be more used to, I guess I would think, being on camera or not being so afraid because of your Instagram or whatever. And it was funny. They're like, no, we don't turn our cameras on either. Like we're almost worse because we feel like we don't have everything together, and it's not Instagrammable how they look today, so they're not turning their cameras on either. And I was like, wow. And then I was like, what? Nobody says anything to you about that? And they're like, well, nobody's really had that conversation. So then I started having the conversation with managers of, you need to have that conversation. If you expect their cameras to be on, don't just ignore it and then have them be annoyed when people don't turn their cameras on. If you expect them to have their cameras on, then you need to communicate that. The expectation is that your cameras are on, unless there is some extreme extenuating circumstances besides I don't have lip gloss. So
if you think about it, so I was talking to somebody the other day, and she said she's on a meeting every week with 100 people on this meeting. And maybe 80 people have their cameras off. And so her point was, I'm not going to turn my camera on for that. And I said, okay, well, that may make sense depending on the culture, whatever. It's a 100-person meeting. On the other hand, if you do turn your camera on, that means you'll be on the first screen.
You'll be the one that gets noticed. And that's what I tell people all the time too. This is particularly for women. This is now a very huge equalizer. Right? There isn't, depending on where you sit around the table, there's no, you can, as you put the camera on, and then you're getting the FaceTime. Think about it, people. You're getting FaceTime if you just turn your cameras on. I encourage managers nowadays to kind of like freeze the screen somewhat, because I don't know whether you find this, but for me, when people are turning their cameras on and off, and it goes from like their picture or their name to them being, and then everybody moves around on the screen and they bump around, and then somebody comes back and now they're at the bottom instead of at the top. So sometimes they say, go in and do the setting where you actually place people now and can put them where you want them.
One thing that I do when we do a lot of work with teams where we will help teams to build trust, learn how to resolve conflict more effectively, and help people get re-engaged with the mission and values and goals of the organization. So we do a lot of those types of workshops. And one thing that I'll do is I will organize people alphabetically on the screen, or if everybody's sharing something, I'll move the squares around to make sure that people are speaking. And that's something that's really easy as a manager to do if you feel like you want to make sure that everybody weighs in on a particular issue or something. Instead of saying, did everybody have a chance to go? You can just be moving them so whether everyone has spoken or not.
That's a really great tip. I don't know that I've ever used it that way, but I like that. Corinne is here. I wanted to put her little message up because so we wanted to say hi. Make sure that Corinne got a mention. So she's saying good morning to us. We're so happy that you are here. Yes, Corinne was my biggest champion over at the women's bar, which was great. Her tenure there.
Such a leader in the legal profession in Chicago and in Illinois. Just fantastic.
And she's great at mentoring, and she also really has good posture and good body language. So we'll put that out there. She has learned. I didn't have to school her much on anything. So I do want to make sure that we get in a couple of the things that are coming up for you before we run out of time today. So tell me a little bit about the Future in Focus 2021 Your Attorney Mastermind for anybody out there that's like, ooh, she's a really smart lady. I would like to work with her.
Well, so we have a 6-month attorney mastermind. The next cohort starts in just a couple of weeks. If you go to futureinfocus2021.com, you can read more about it. And you can also click on a button there that says schedule a free legal career clarity call. And I want to make that offer to any attorney who's watching who wants to have 30 minutes to talk about their legal career. And we can talk about whether one-on-one coaching, whether the Future in Focus Attorney Mastermind might be a good fit for you, but more generally, what's going on in your career. I can suggest some resources that you might want to check out to help you with whatever challenges you're having or want to avoid having down the road. And
so as people are moving back into this sort of hybrid, back into the workforce or not, do you have any tips for folks on that weirdness that now we feel when we actually do see people in person? People always ask me about the handshake, and I usually say, well, the handshake will be back eventually. I think politicians like it too much. They're not going to, they're going to want to keep the handshake, or it's become such a part of our culture that I feel that the handshake will come back. But right now, as soon as you see somebody, there's that weird moment of like, oh, wait, yeah, we're not allowed to do that. Or do we have masks? And we've gotten so used to seeing people on Zoom without masks that when we go back into the office, it's almost worse, because then we can't see their facial expressions. So have you been working with people on that, going back into the conference room or doing mediation, across the table all with masks on? Anything for people on that end?
Yeah, so we are working with a number of organizations on how to manage the issues that are going to come up with hybrid teams, which we know some people are not going to be comfortable coming back to the workplace at the same time as others. We know that if for parents, since kids can't get vaccinated at this point, there will be people who need to continue working from home and who want to continue working from home. And so there's a lot that we're doing with teams around how are we going to set our norms? What is it going to look like? One thing that I would just suggest is that you ask. So if you encounter somebody, on the street or whatever, you just ask, are you comfortable shaking hands? Or just put it out there. And I think in your workplace, but I think it's just so important to talk about it, to have that open communication, and to understand that people's experiences over the last year have been very different. The person who went off to their vacation home and had this lovely time in the countryside had a very different experience than the person who may have lost a loved one or has been having family challenges or whose significant other may have lost their job, something like that. So there's just a wide range. And so whatever you're thinking as the manager is great, but that doesn't mean everybody in the team is going to feel the same way. So you want to have communication about it. And I should also mention, you were asking about tools, that we have a free executive presence assessment that people can take. I forgot to mention that. You can just go to enhancedep.com and it'll ask you a series of questions, and that may be helpful for people who are watching as well.
Great. Yeah, I'll make sure all of those things are in the show notes, so to speak, because it runs live on YouTube, but then I think it's harder to find. Like, it doesn't just go onto your page necessarily, at least when I'm trying to find it. So I always make sure that I download the recording of the broadcast and make sure that there's show notes. So for anybody that's looking for that, I'll try to get that posted to make sure that all those notes are in there. So I think the overall lesson from today is simply to communicate, to ask for what you need. If people aren't showing up the way that you want them to be the executive, be the manager, and communicate that to them. But thank you so much for being here. This has been a very fun conversation, and I hope people have taken a lot out of it, particularly, as I said, the communication piece from the body language side. It really is how you're showing up and being yourself as much as possible, and opening up those lines of communication, no matter where you are or where you're at. So take care, everybody. Thanks again, Amy.
Thank you. Bye.